this Manchin discourse is, people are saying, we interviewed a guest on the Hill the other day, I think, who said this, that the reason that Manchin is finally on board with some of the stuff that he's been saying he wouldn't be on board with is because he just got pressured. He didn't like the idea that he was being framed as the, bête noire of the party, and that he was the right people that he cared about were mad enough at him that he was getting pressure from in the state. And that's why he finally flipped and agreed to do some of this. And it's like, well, if that's what it takes, pressuring Manchin the way we've all been saying he should be pressured. And, Bernie's been saying he needs to go to West Virginia and rah, rah, rah. Why are we now 18 months past when we first started talking about this? That seems like a really, I don't know, it seems like an inadequate explanation for the flip to me.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, no, there was a Politico article that tried to outline, what was happening, like how did this decision-making process work? And I think there was a piece in the Washington Post as well that I read. The explanations are a little, like you said, from a kind of like, assume someone is barely reasonable, You're like, how is this a real person, Because even when he quit the first time, there were a lot of reports, and I assume these reports are accurate. They have good sourcing and all this kind of stuff. You never know. Obviously, they don't really tell you who's telling them this stuff, but whatever. That he got mad at a sentence in a Biden press release and just rage quit the whole thing, and just kind of felt personally offended. And then later on, the stuff that we're seeing now, in the Washington Post one, they were saying that one of his colleagues, I forget which senator was, and they may have even been on a plane together, was telling him, just kind of like hyping him up, like, dude, you could be such a hero right now. And I swear Manchin is quoted in the piece, through the secondhand process as saying, it'd be like hitting a homer in the ninth inning or something.
Yeah, I saw that. I mean, like he's just is he a child? Like, is he Tom Hanks and big? Like, what's happening?
I know. I was like, this is real dumb guy shit. Like, this is just, people like this, but you're like, they should not be senators.
In Congress, yeah. Okay, so for whatever reason, he's on board, and Kyrsten Sinema is now the one that people are playing ball with. You already mentioned that she quashed the carry interest loophole closing of it, right? And I also saw some people tweeting about how, Kamala Harris's husband's law firm is out there reassuring their clients that they don't have to worry about that, which is a fun kind of perspective of how conflicted these interests are among people who claim to be on the right side of history, but never mind all of that. So now she's the one that is the tail wagging the dog, as it were. How do we end up in this situation where someone like Kyrsten Sinema can shut down things that are very popular policies and policies that only negatively affect extremely affluent people and still live to tell her story? I mean, I don't mean literally, sorry, but politically survive kind of thing.
Yeah, she is an interesting case. She is weirder than Manchin, ultimately. Manchin, the focus is always on Manchin, and I think it's part because Manchin is public. He's out there. He's going on Fox and Meet the Nation, or Face the Nation or whatever it's called. And she's, from what you can tell, one, she only seems to talk to Axios. That's the only place that ever has any information, like from Kirsten world, whereas the other places you see in Politico and the Post and Bloomberg, people have a little sourcing. It's all Axios. They're the only people that seem to have it. And the other senators say that like she just doesn't even talk to them. And she kind of gets this stuff out through Axios when she has opinions. She just kind of laid low the whole time. And you're right. It's weird. The other thing is with Manchin, it's West Virginia, and people will point out, look, that's like a Republican plus 15 state or whatever it is now. Like, it's kind of remarkable that they even have a Democratic senator. And on some level, you're kind of like, hell, I mean, he sucks, but I mean, imagine a Republican, and that's, it's kind of remarkable he's winning. So maybe you give him credit for that, even though he's kind of a right-wing Democrat. Arizona has a second Democratic senator. And like, you probably don't even know who he is because he's just like a normal guy.
Yeah.
And so it's like, there's no you can explain what Manchin as having West Virginian idiosyncrasies, eccentricities. Anyways, you can explain it that way. Arizona, the other senator from Arizona is Mark Kelly. He was like an astronaut or whatever, and he's like a normal senator, you know. And she's just like an oddball. Like I read a piece the other day in The Nation from a while ago. I didn't even realize this happened. That last summer she did an internship at a winery and made like $1,100. Uh,
Uh, oh.
she loves wine. I mean, I don't know. Like, she's kind of
She's
a
such a
strange person.
stereotype. I mean, she was. We've been talking on the Hill a little bit about uh, Arizona in the context of the primaries and the conservative stuff that's going on there. But she is. The narrative, of course, is that in a moderate state, you need a moderate politician, and she has to be moderate. And like Kyrsten Sinema was a Green Party first openly lesbian or bi, I forget which now,
She's
LGBT,
bi, yeah.
okay, person elected to Congress, weird dressing, pink hair, all of the things. But because she's taking very unpopular conservative stances, she's weirdly being lumped in with these kind of free-thinking, right-wing populist types and characterized as moderate when there's nothing middle of the road about her political approach. It's like she's antagonizing everyone in equal measure with an upside that seems very unclear.
Yes, no, it's very odd. Even like, are the people of Arizona well represented by a senator who doesn't talk to her colleagues? I mean, that's just, like you can put aside any other consideration and just say, do you want your representatives to talk to the other representatives when they're making laws that are going to govern you? Yeah, I think I would like that. Even if, regardless of their politics, that seems like a baseline of what we're trying to do here,
Yeah.
And if you've got some kind of problem with that, probably don't be a senator,
Yeah. Well, she doesn't seem to be attracting the kind of primary energy. There's not, the Democrats, generally speaking, I don't think are effectively weaponize primary challenges the way conservatives do. If you're a conservative and you cross the line, Donald Trump is going to be in your state with a challenger successfully or unsuccessfully, but your life is going to be made a living hell. Even as Manchin was being, even as he made himself into the president of the United States over the last year and a half, by being the one that said he was going to hold up all of these agendas, you couldn't get Joe Biden to say, "Oh, I'm not going to support him for reelection. Oh, I'm gonna support a challenger." You couldn't get anybody in the Democratic Party really to pressure him that way because there was this belief that he could just walk and no longer be a Democrat.
Yeah, and there's a belief that any Democrat that would beat him in the primary could not win in a general in West Virginia. That he's like just a unique figure who's a vestigial figure. He used to be governor. And like he's like the last Democrat from West Virginia. Like once he's gone, we're just nothing's ever going to come out of that state. That's like a common belief. And I don't know that's totally unreasonable there, but Sinema's a good example of it's not just that. It's not just like, well, we're worried about because they have another Democratic senator there. It's a 50-50 state. Whoever primaried her would probably have just the same chance of winning as she has of winning. You know what I mean? Like it's not like she's some kind of unique star flourishing in a red environment. She's just an oddball who doesn't do better than the other Democratic senator who is not an oddball and just votes like a normal Democrat,
Yeah. Well, Matt, let me ask you this. Bernie Sanders is getting some pushback now for offering his own pushback on this bill, wanting it to be more, wanting it to be better.
Mr. President, my understanding is that the so-called Inflation Reduction Act may be coming to the floor in the coming days. And there are some people who think this bill is worth supporting. There are others who think that it is not. But whatever your views on this bill may be, let us be clear. As currently written, this is an extremely modest piece of legislation that does virtually nothing to address the enormous crises that working families all across this country are facing today. This reconciliation bill falls far short of what the American people want, what they need, and what they are begging us to do. given that this is the last reconciliation bill that we will be considering this year, it is the only opportunity that we have to do something significant for the American people that requires only 50 votes and that cannot be filibustered. In other words, this is the opportunity, because on anything significant, we're not going to get 60 votes. So this, in my view, is a moment that should not be squandered.
What do you make of that? First of all, what is Bernie hoping to get out of this? And I mean, the kind of liberal backlash against him is pretty predictable. But is Bernie right?
I mean, he's right. Of course, the bill is, and it's always hard to say because it kind of depends on what you compare it to. You know what I mean? And this is always a jockeying game that people like to play is, well, what is your baseline? What is your baseline? Now, in the case of Build Back Better, we got a couple things. We got all the promises that Biden made in his campaign, and we can compare it to those. This is a huge letdown relative to that. And we've got what was in the Build Back Better bill up to this point. And I had problems with the way it was designed, but at least, it did include child care benefits. It did include some paid leave benefits. It did include some pre-K, it included a lot of stuff that is all gone now. I had a piece at People's Policy Project that was just talking about the, social benefits, the like welfare state element of it, because that's what I mostly track. And I listed, I actually went through Biden's campaign website, his old website. If you go to archive.org, you can see what was on his platform or whatever. And he's got, enact paid family leave, enact child care subsidies, increase the EITC, increase Social Security benefits, SSI, SSDI. I mean, all this stuff. And most of this stuff is not like a big deal. Like it's small little tweaks, right now, if you get disability insurance, you actually have to wait 5 months to get your first check. Which most people don't know. Like that's a pretty small tweak, but it's a big deal to people fall in that gap and whatever, you promise to do it. And it's all, none of it. The only thing that really survived was they increased the subsidies that you can receive if you buy an insurance plan on an Obamacare exchange. And only 3.6% of Americans get their insurance through the exchanges. And they basically just reduce the amount you have to pay by like $500 to $1,000 a year for your plan. I mean, whatever, it's fine. But it's like relative to what we were talking about, it's a huge letdown,
So who was it? Was it Manchin that was opposed to those things? Is that why they got cut?
Yeah, he was opposed to pretty much all of it, except ostensibly he was okay with universal pre-K in some of his earlier statements about it, and the alleged, I don't know if it's the secret agreement he made with Schumer way back in the day about this, that he was okay with that. But that didn't make it either. And I don't know why that is. Maybe he's afraid of inflation or something. He doesn't want to spend, but that was the one that it seemed like, okay, well, at least we'll get this one through because Manchin says he's for it. West Virginia has universal pre-K for age 4, I believe. So, he's cool with it. But that wouldn't
Would
make
it cause
either.
inflation?
No, I mean, it's not that any given program causes inflation. It's an issue of the budget balance can contribute to inflation, right? So if you spend way more than you tax, then in the same way that can stimulate the economy because it increases spending. If you overstimulate, then you could get inflation, right? So, it's the issue is really just how you want to fund these things, or if you want to fund them. When we're in a recession, it's not necessary to bring in taxes to fund things because the deficit will just create stimulus, which will lead to more employment, and you won't see a big price effect. But if you're starting to get unemployment really, really low, you spend a bunch of money into the economy without taxing anything out, then just as, like I said, that will cause stimulus, but the stimulus will result in price increases as opposed to output increases. So you just need to dial in the taxes to make sure you're covering your bases. So
does it work then? I mean, I guess what feels so asymmetrical to me all the time is that there's this robust conversation about the spending of the low income majority versus the percentage of the population that holds the majority of the wealth. And there is this, because there are more people obviously who are not rich. There is this focus on, well, did my little stimulus check cause me to be able to buy some extra Pampers to put in the closet for later in a way that I wouldn't have been able to do before? And it does, I guess my fundamental question is, do you always have to, do you have to minimize the amount of money that lower income people have at all to curb the effects of inflation? Because a world where we are already telling people who don't have enough that you have to have even less, you're basically admitting that capitalism doesn't work unless you don't only have a working class and poor population, but you have a particularly depressed working class and poor population that doesn't have enough money to even cover a $400, $500 expense that's unexpected.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's not about any particular group of people having the money. It's all about aggregates, right? So if the aggregate consumer spending or consumer demand, exceeds, what can be supplied, then you will expect inflation. Typically, these things are a little bit more complicated and mysterious than that, but that's the basic idea.
But that's the problem. I mean, that's fundamentally the problem, because if we're talking about goods and services, right? If I'm saying meat is expensive, if I want to drive down the cost of meat, I've got to make sure that people just literally can't afford a steak. Well,
just balancing the amount of money they have against the amount of steaks that are out there.
Right. And Bernie might say, well, there's price gouging going on in the meat industry because there's only these 4 companies. And Biden had a plan at an earlier time to break up some of these industries and fund smaller manufacturers. I don't know if that actually went. I don't remember if that actually
Biden
went through.
did something. It was nothing.
Right. I mean, but you could figure it out that way. But it seems to me, because, you can't say I'm going to control demand for steak by taxing the 1%, because they're only 1%. And even if they're each eating 5 steaks every day, it's got to be that the majority of the steak market is still, consumed by everybody else.
You balance it. You gotta. So if you think about it, and this is obviously a simplistic way to look at it, but if there's an aggregate amount of total consumer spending that the economy can tolerate without prices going way up, then if you want to increase one group's spending, you need to decrease another's by an offsetting amount. And so that's what taxes, can accomplish. So we have countries where, for instance, in, a Nordic country, the 10th percentile person, the difference between the 90th percentile person and the 10th percentile person in terms of their income is 3 times. So the 90th percentile is 3 times. In the US is 6 times. So you can put more money at the bottom and offset it by taking money at the top and still have the same total spending, right? So it's just moving it around. But it does create some political problems potentially if some people who are actually doing pretty well get pissed. If you're making 200 grand a year, you probably should be paying a little more tax. I know Biden said under 400 grand, but probably should be a little bit lower than that.
Yeah.
So that's the problem we run into more than anything else is Democrats make these promises to only raise taxes on just the tiniest group of people. And, there's a lot you can do there because there is a lot of money up there and there is some spending up there. But if you want to do big shit in the long run, you need to broaden that base so that you can get more. You can,
I guess my issue is that it seems like because, and correct me if I'm wrong, so much of this does seem to be driven by supply side issues that are sector specific, that you're not going to, even if nobody had, it seems like unless you address the problem at the root, you're always going to still have that supply chain issue, regardless of what the demand is like. Does that make sense? At the end of the day, if we go to war with, LOL, if we go to war with China and can't get any more semiconductors from Taiwan, no tax plan in the world, no interest rate hike in the world is going to manifest semiconductors.
It doesn't create the supply incentives. It just handles the demand, And so you can try to do both at once. And I mean, if we get more supply online, then we can let more money out. You know what I mean? Like you're always trying to get supply as high as you can for the most part. I mean, there's certain considerations like I don't want people working 15 hours a day just to produce more stuff, but you're trying to pump that supply up at all times, and then you just have to manage demand with that. So if supply goes down and there's no way to get it back up quickly, you might need to bring down demand, or you're going to see prices rise. But if you can get that supply going again, those disruptions get fixed, then you can let the money out again.
This
the balancing
idea,
act.
but this idea that bringing down demand by lowering people's salaries, suppressing labor, is somehow better for working people than the cost of the actual good being high. Seems counterintuitive to me. I'm not saying that. I mean, maybe one of the margins is better or worse, but they both seem obviously bad.
Well, it's important to distinguish between different quantities here, right? So in the past, we've talked a lot, and there's been a lot of fixation on wage inflation as driving things, right? Is the wage price spiral. That's probably what Richard Wolff was talking about. Mm-hmm. That's not really what we're dealing with here. Wages are not increasing all that rapidly, and they're certainly not increasing faster than the rate of inflation. Like wages are falling relative to inflation right now. So we don't really have a situation where wages escalate, then price escalates, then wage escalates, then price escalates. That's not what's happening. And it's unlikely to happen in the US anyways, because we don't have unions or any kind of power structure to make sure that workers can even do something like that. What instead we're seeing is just a lot of disposable income in people's pockets. And I don't even think that's because of the stimulus personally. I think that's because people saved a lot of money for a period there. And then the money was accumulated in the bank accounts, and now they're spending it out faster. But
who has all this disposable income? It doesn't gel with when you talk to people.
In the accounts, they keep track of this in the government, how much money is sitting in people's checking accounts and stuff like that. And I mean, spending dropped by like 20 to 30% when COVID hit. For a long time there, you couldn't go to bars or anything like that. So you're right. Like there are poor people who they're always scraping, but there's also a middle there where if they stop kind of discretionary purchases for 5 or 6 months, might end up having 10 grand in their bank account, and they spend that out real quickly after COVID's over. And
well, student debt, I will fully acknowledge that I have been able to save in a way that I've never saved in my life because of the student debt moratorium.
That's true. That was putting about, I think the Fed was saying that was putting about $100 billion a year into people's pockets from not paying. So
yeah, and that's the interest boon. I mean, in 2 years, I achieved more in terms of being able to pay off my principal than I have in the previous 10 years of, say, or to 8 years of payments, of maximum payments on my 10-year payment plan. You know what I mean? And so I wonder, I mean, do you think that part of the push to restart the loan payments at the end of the month is related to that?
For sure. I mean, within the White House, I think that's a major consideration. Is this might be a way to tamp down inflation for the same reason that taxes work, right? People will pay that money into the government. It'll go up to the Department of Ed, and then it will sit, and that will bring some money out of the economy. With that said, I don't think he will. I don't think he's going to restart it. That's my guess right now.
Why not?
Well, it's just so close to the election. I think he'll get it. He'll do one more extension, and then he'll restart it after the election. That's my guess. Now, I don't know about forgiveness. For a while, I was pretty confident that he was going to do that because they were putting out all these messages all the time, and you would see it in all the papers. The unnamed source says this and that, and now I don't know. I think it almost would have been more likely if BBB had just failed entirely instead of this Inflation Reduction Act, because now he's got some kind of victory that he can hang his hat on. Whereas if that had failed entirely, he might kind of feel like, oh, I need to do something,
I feel like he can't get away with ending the moratorium without canceling something.
Yeah.
Or else he is literally, worse than Trump. You know what I mean? Like Trump is the guy who started the moratorium and Biden's the guy who ended the moratorium. The only way he can try to kind of balance that is to be able to claim that he's canceled something significant. Now, it's not going to help a lot. I mean, if it's the 10,000, you know, okay, it's better than nothing. The average student debtor has $30,000 in student debt plus, and it's more for all the various groups that we talk about. And Biden specifically promised to cancel all student loan debt for HBCU graduates and various other groups. That will be a reneging on his promise. But the vast majority of people don't know that he ever promised that. Every time you say out loud, if you say out loud, Biden promised to cancel all HBCU debt for people who earn under $125,000 a year. Every Ukraine flag and emoji, Biden booster, K-Hive person will come at you and accuse you of being a liar. And if you screen grab his, website or the articles that were written at the time about it, they have like such cognitive dissonance about it. And that's how you get away with like Bill Maher arguing that Biden's problem is that he's capitulated to the left.
You could have it like a sensible middle party, and it would then what would happen is it would force the Democrats to go back to being the sensible middle party. And they would, because they would see that's where, Biden reminds me of some grandfather, and when AOC and the woke people come into his office, and he just goes along. He doesn't really understand it. It's like, Grandpa, can we have money to go play Fortnite? And he's like, just take. I don't know what Fortnite is. I don't know what TikTok is. Just get out of my hair, And that's really.
Biden will renege on his own campaign promise to do something less than what he pledged. The left will complain about it, not because it's what we really want, but because it's not even what he promised. And Bill Maher, because he is too, he is so unaware of what the facts of what the policies were that Biden ran on, because nobody cares about policies. It's just vibes. Yeah. He accuses the left of really complaining about not getting what they want when we're really complaining about him not even following through in his own pledges.
Yeah, no, that goes back to that question about Bernie Sanders and how people are mad. Mm-hmm. It's all depends on what you want to compare it to. And obviously there are people really personally identified with the Democratic Party. It's not something I can really fully understand, but like it means something to them. And it's like when your friend screws up and you're like, nah, you're fine. You didn't,
like an enabler.
Yeah, you did great. No, it was them. It was the other. It seems kind of like that. But yeah, I mean, these are things they said he would do, and especially if you're talking about stuff he can do through executive action. I mean, he said he was going to do it. He has a unilateral power to do it. You should be able to be upset about that.
Yeah, I'm not giving advice to Biden, and I don't want to show my cards here, but it would be so much harder for me to make the case for full student debt cancellation, 50,000 even, and to be so big mad about it online all the time if he did cancel even 10,000. Because already people, he cancels like a million, he cancels these little tiny amounts of student debt. He did it for people with disabilities. I mean, things that matter for the people, the handful of people who are affected by it.
Right.
But he does this, and then if you say, well, cancel student debt, you get an army of people saying, but he did. Look at all that he's done. Look at all he's done for those small amounts. So imagine if he actually did 10,000 for everyone.
When he made specific promises.
Right.
Like, whatever you want. He didn't just say, I'm going to do something about the student debt thing. And then maybe you could say, well, he did. Look at this and that. It's like, he put dollar figures to it. So. Right.
And talked about specific groups of people. But even that being the case, I do think that my job, Asher Taylor's job, the student debt advocate's job would be a lot harder if he canceled 10,000, because then we sound like big baby brats who aren't happy with this like $10,000 giveaway that we got. So from his perspective, I think it would be smart for him to just go ahead, suck it up and cancel the 10,000 and shut people like me up. But, we'll see what happens.
Yeah, I think from what I can gather, just being in the circle, sort of on the outside of the circle of all this shit, I think he personally just doesn't like to do it. Like he just kind of doesn't really think it's a big deal and doesn't like, I don't know, students. You know what I mean? Like he just kind of has
no
that
sympathy for young people. Famous.
Yeah, you saw that thing he said.
There was a war raging. There was a bitter fight over even whether we should talk about the environment. Women were still viewed as second-class citizens and not prepared to have significant jobs, thought that. And we were told the people didn't talk to one another over the war. And we were told, drop out, go out to Haight-Ashbury, get engaged. Now, shortly after I graduated in '68, Kent State, 17 kids shot dead. And so the younger generation now tells me how tough things are. Give me a break. No, I have no empathy for it. Give me a break. Because here's the deal, guys. We decided we were going to change the world, and we did. We did. We finished the civil rights movement to the first stage. The women's movement came to being. So my message is, get involved.
So I think that's kind of his feeling, and it's more just kind of he's being dragged along a little bit. So it's kind of an uphill
Well, then he
battle.
shouldn't have said it. He shouldn't have promised it.
I
Also,
know
it's so perverse that he had this line during the campaign about how he had to pay off his kids' student debt and how much student debt they have. And he does this all the time. He uses his own personal experience as one of the poorer senators in Congress to empathize and say, oh, I've been in that situation. Oh, I had to pay my son's medical bills. Obama had to help me pay Bo's medical bills, and then flip it into, and that's why I don't believe we should have Medicare for all. And that's why we shouldn't cancel student debt. He's like the pull the ladder up behind you type.
Yeah, no, he's very skilled at making these nonsensical personal stories that don't really then relate to what he really get moved. Like, it's like, let me tell you something about Bo, and then you hear the story and you're like, okay, and then he just moves on. You're like, well, wait a minute, what does that got to do with this?
Well, it's even more insidious than that, because what are you going to say?
Right.
You're going to interrupt the guy over a story about losing his son, who he clearly loved enormously and was devastated by his loss. You're going to interrupt that story and be like, okay, but actually it's extremely perverse that you want to deny us healthcare when you know how important it is.
Hey YouTube, thanks for watching. Just a reminder that this is a podcast. You can catch an extra premium episode every Monday for $5 a month at patreon.com/badfaithpodcast. That's patreon.com/badfaithpodcast for $5 a month, an extra episode every week. Additionally, please do consider liking this video, subscribing to this channel. It helps us out. It helps independent media beat the algorithm. We appreciate you. And as always, keep the faith.